LSA and his team. They got a quick presentation that they'd like to do. And
Great, thanks, Tim. So, as Tim mentioned, I'm David Clore, and I'm principal with LSA, the environmental planners on the project for the district and for you all. Let me start by asking a question, because I see a lot of familiar, I think, a lot of familiar faces from the meeting that we held a year and a half or whenever ago that was, on the earlier project, when we had prepared an initial study at that point. Can I have a quick show of hands of everybody who was at that meeting over in the library? So, yeah, maybe half or something like that. A little of my presentation is going to be a duplicate of what you heard there, particularly some of the background and procedural stuff. But I think it's important that everybody be able to understand what that process is. So bear with me if this stuff is familiar to you. Oops. So at tonight's meeting, we're going to talk first about rules and requests, sort of the process for the meeting. And then the purpose of the meeting, I'll give you just the broadest of overviews of the project itself, what the elements of the project are, and then describe a little bit about what the purpose of the EIR was, describe the secret process, and remind you of the timeline, where we are in that process and where we started, then get to the meat of the EIR, which is its findings, what it was we concluded, and then describe what the next steps are going to be. First of all, the rules tonight, and you guys all look like you're very well-mannered and collaborative, so these may be a moot point, but let me just make a few points here. First of all, I'll be the one pointing to people and calling on you when it gets to be your turn after my little 8 or 10-minute presentation. And some of the key things are, one person speaks at a time after I point to you so that we don't have a lot of people talking and interrupting each other. Everybody is respectful of each speaker. You may have quite different views about the topic tonight, but everybody's point is worth listening to. To begin with, since we have a good-sized crowd, I'd like to sort of limit it to maybe 3 to 4 minutes or so. We're not going to keep time up here with a stopwatch, but give everybody a chance to get through your comments. Obviously, or hopefully obviously, no cheering and applause and other catcalling. And then a couple of requests from us, your environmental consultants. One is, just remember, there's no need to offer duplicate comments or questions in detail. If someone has raised a given question that's kind of technical in nature and you wonder how we did a certain thing, and we will then respond to it in writing, it isn't a vote. There's no reason for a lot of people to raise the exact same question over and over, because in fact, in the document that we prepare, we'll probably just cross-reference back to the first big place where we answer that particular question in detail. And then secondly, if we can ask your forbearance to really focus on environmental questions. That's what we're here for tonight. This is not the meeting of the board, who will eventually deal with the merits of the project and whether it should happen or not. What we're here to deal with is whether the environmental documentation that we've prepared gives enough information for you all to understand the project and for the board to make some sort of a decision.
Microphone.
Speak up.
No, not much.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can. So, tonight's meeting is to receive comments on the draft EIR, and just a little bit about the timing involved. So the public comment period began when we published the document on May 1st of this year. We'll be taking both oral and if you have written comments that you want to turn in. I know the district has already received a number of letters and emails and memos about the project, but if you'd like to turn those in, you may tonight. And then just to note that June 17th is the final day for comments, and that is the end of the 45-day legally mandated time period. That would be next Monday, a week from yesterday. As I mentioned earlier, the comments should be specific to the draft EIR and not in general about the project's merits or about Measure C or spending of district money or those sorts of things. Next, then, we will prepare this response to comments document, which will address all of the comments that are asked in written form, and hopefully that document will be a little bit shorter than was the draft EIR with all of its appendices, which I know was a big lift if you actually printed or read everything. And lastly, I just want to emphasize that there are no decisions that will be made tonight. This is just our time to glean from you what your questions and comments are on the document. And as an analogous comment, we won't be engaging in dialogue and actually answering questions tonight because there's a lot of comments already have come in on paper. And so we'll want to sit down and answer those all in one sort of coherent, thoughtful, organized way instead of trying to give you half answers tonight. So the project itself, although, yes, sir?
How do you intend to answer those opinions or whatever that have been expressed to you so far?
We will be, I'll describe it in detail in just a little bit, but we will be preparing a formal response document that takes every single letter and every single email that we've received and respond point by point to all of the various questions. Same with the verbal comments that are made tonight.
How do people see it?
It will be published and made available at least 10 days before the board takes up the issue.
Where?
I would say right now, in a similar way to the way in which the draft EIR has been made available. If you've signed in over there and given us an email or an address, you would be one of the people who would be notified.
But the EIR didn't address our comments, it just listed them.
I can see there are a lot of questions which I'm going to get to in the presentation. Sir in the back.
Yeah, this is a process question. My name is Mark Lewis, and I'm your next door neighbor, and I have not seen any information on this project.
Again, that will be answered. Let me.
You said, pardon me, sir, you said that the 45-day approval process ends in a week, but I had no opportunity to do anything about this project at all. I'm your next door neighbor, so what I'm requesting is start the clock back 45 days, provide us with the information that we need. We review it, provide us time we need to review the information we need to.
That is a set of issues that I'll be describing here, but we hear you and we will respond to that. So back to the presentation. The project itself then is a little different than the one that some of you saw back a year and a half ago or so. It involves the following 6 different elements: a field lighting system, and then exit lighting of a lower brightness just for people leaving the site, 2 different public address systems, a sound wall behind the visitor side bleachers, a concession stand and restroom, and then out in the future, a possible standalone press box behind the home side bleachers and a future ticket booth. Again, these are all described in a lot more detail in the document itself. The approvals that the project needs to get in order to go forward include 3 different steps on the part of the school district. First of all, and before anything else, is certification of the EIR. If the board decides not to certify it, then the project can't go on any further. Then they would deal with approving the project itself, and then construction bids and contract approvals. And because this is a project of the size and scope that it is at a school, it also needs to go through the division of the state architect. Let me just briefly, for those of you who haven't gone through an environmental review process like this before, tell you and remind the others of what CEQA is about. What we're supposed to be doing here in this document is identifying for you and for the board the project's significant environmental impacts, and then identifying ways to mitigate or avoid those impacts. We're also, because we're doing an EIR this time, which is kind of the next step in complexity up from the simple initial study mitigated negative declaration that was being processed in the previous project, we need to look at alternatives and ask the question of whether there aren't better alternatives to what's being proposed, and we've done so in this document. It also informs the public and the decision makers of those environmental effects. And then most importantly, or a point that people get confused on sometimes, the EIR doesn't dictate approval or rejection of the proposed project. We frankly don't care about whether the project goes forward or not. That's not our responsibility as the environmental consultants. So the process or the timeline for this project, I've included a couple of 3 bullets there about the earlier project. You know, that was proposed back in 2011, and then the draft initial study was circulated in May 2012. And then toward the end of that process, the district and the school proposed a revised project and then decided to prepare an EIR. I've noticed in some of the letters that have been coming in, people have asked the question of, why didn't you respond to our comments on the previous project? Well, we were well into responding on those comments when the district decided to both meet with neighbors and make some changes to the project, and so we put that whole process on hold and basically started it anew with the process that we're in right now.